Mr. Manning, you want to lead us in the pledge, please?
Stand. Right hand over your heart. Ready to begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no communications. Okay. And with that, we're going to go to item number 1, and I'm going to give it to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As part of the fiscal year 22-23 budget, we'll start back there. An allocation was included to conduct a user fee study and update the city's cost allocation plan. And in January of 2023, the City Council awarded a professional services agreement with Matrix Consulting Group to conduct the study. The findings of the study were presented originally to the City Council on November 20th, 2023. And after discussion, the Council requested a workshop to further analyze the fees, many of which are new, so that's what brings us to today. So in today's workshop, staff will once again review the reasons for conducting a study such as this. We will take a closer look at some of the fee categories within the fire, building, and planning departments, and we have experts from each of those departments that will present those in further detail. We will then take questions on any specific fees that the council may have questions on, and again, our panel here will be able to answer those questions. So the goal for today's workshop is to, number one, obviously answer your questions on any specific fees that are out here. Two, to provide for staff to receive policy direction as to what level the fee should be set at. So do we want to set them at full cost recovery, a percentage of cost recovery? And this can vary. I mean, this can vary between categories. It can vary by fee. If the council chooses, perhaps maybe a phased-in approach, for some of these things. The one thing that I will say is if there are fees that are currently being charged that we're charging more than, obviously we're going to have to adopt a fee that would bring that one into line with full cost. So anything that is going to result in a reduction, we would recommend that would be done right away, regardless of that policy direction. And the last thing is to receive policy direction as to what level the council would like to set the administrative or indirect rate at. So we will get into that in momentarily. So based on the feedback, staff will create a final resolution for adoption, most likely at the second meeting in February. So just to make sure that everyone understands, there would be no final decisions made today. This is just for council to ask questions and for staff to receive direction. So the one question that people may ask is, why do a fee study? And really, if you look at it, we're probably overdue for one. It's been 10 years since we've updated our fees, and it is recommended to do a study every 3 to 5 years. 5 years is usually the standard, but with our city's growth and changes in staff, there may need to be a more frequent cadence to that. So that was one of the things that was discussed on November 20th was maybe we do look at this again in 3 years. But again, we will monitor that based on staffing levels and how we do things. So the study that we've done today is based on our current staffing level and levels of activity. We're getting more detailed on our fees as well. So we're actually adding a bunch of new fees, which will provide more cost certainty for our customers. So that's an important aspect as well. Since our last fee update, we did this little thing called forming a fire department. Very small thing, right? So obviously we created new fees associated with that with this study as well. So that was a big part of the rationale and the push for doing this study. So with that, we're going to go into some of the details. We're going to start with the fire department. So I'm going to hand off the presentation at this point to our fire chief.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So with the implementation of the City Fire Department in January of 2018, when we went live, we concentrated on fire operations and suppression with EMS up front. Previously, the contract provider, being Riverside County Fire, took care of most of the fire prevention, inspection, and investigation needs as needed for the city. So when we inherited the fire services department, if council recalls, about a year ago, maybe a little over almost 2 years, staff came before you to suggest and authorize the reorganization of the fire department, which included the designation of a deputy fire marshal at the time, leading into the formation of a fire prevention bureau. And to repeat myself, the Fire Prevention Bureau generally covers inspections, investigations, education, and some other ancillary duties. After the termination of the contract with Riverside County, Charles Abbott and Associates has been the contract fire prevention, fire marshal services, if you will. And they, in terms of plan check and inspection, have been providing contract fire inspectors throughout the past, 5+ years. So with the taking a look at the reorganization of the department, we saw a deficit. Previous city manager and I discussed it, carried on the project, and implemented the Fire Prevention Bureau, which brings us to today. So the types of activities that we're looking at immediately are costs associated with new building construction, remodels, and updated Uniform Fire Code, or California Fire Code as it is adopted, doing those inspections, permitting, plan checks and review, and I think everybody's aware of all the construction that's occurred in the city over the last several years, looking at the costs associated with those fees. I'm sorry, the costs associated with those activities and the actual fee schedule. In addition to the construction or reconstruction or remodeling, the annual operating permits required to run businesses, restaurants, mercantiles, all the different types of occupancies, and or things such as board and care homes, multifamily dwellings, apartment buildings, and those types of occupancies require a specific level of inspection. Occupancies that require mandates and inspections. I'm sure everybody in the room is well familiar with unfunded mandates and how those continually change through, and that applies to all the different types of zoning that we have, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential, and the sub sections associated with, and the different mandates that come down from the state. We have no and have had very little say based on the lack of any of those fees and salary surveys to recover the cost. And Charles Abbott has been providing for those based on a limited industry standard application of what's reasonable leading up to this review, so to speak. The other thing that's been lacking that we have taken a look at that was discussed is our ability as a city for cost recovery. We send our engine out on the freeway. Folks are involved in unfortunate accidents, big rigs, you name it. Other things come up, and we have not had the mechanism to recover those costs where applicable, even from insurance companies. Insurance companies subrogate almost every type of incident and filter down the payment under their insurance plans, and we've been leaving money on the table, so to speak, for the lack of a cost recovery program. And then the last thing that I'll touch on is, as you well know, this last week we went live with our Advanced Life Support Paramedic program. As we continue to build into the future, there's going to be opportunities for the city to bolster those services, which could include up to ground medical transport for pre-hospital care services. And we have not had the mechanism to address any of those things and set up for those future builds. Now, cost recovery associated with regular cost recovery for spontaneous incidents. We also talk about cost recovery when we send our folks out on strike teams and other mechanisms and cost recovery and salary surveys and all the fees associated with. It ties back to how we are able to apply for and receive grant funding. So it's all wrapped in one big package together under what has been identified as what I've seen with the report that's provided to us. So I'll defer back to Will, and that's the end of my report, pending any of your questions.
I think it would be appropriate at this time to, if the council has any questions related to the fire fees, this might be, or any questions related to fire, this would be appropriate time to ask those questions.
Yeah, I just had a couple. One of the new fees I saw was the for the fire response to fire alarms. I saw there was, I guess, first response. There would be for a false fire alarm. There's a fee for the first response, and then that fee increases for additional false responses. Do you know how often do you guys get these false fire alarms that you guys are responding to?
Councilmember Manley, I am happy to report that by and large our activities, we do respond to those types of false alarms. Residential ringing alarms, CO alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, etc. It's a very small percentage by and large, and I'm happy to report it's built into that. It's built into the fee survey, but I have to tell you that it's not a nuisance, but it's much like a police ringing alarm. You have those businesses and or residences that if they have a maintenance issue, it becomes a habitual nuisance and takes away from 911 responsibilities. I'm happy to say that unless Jerry can weigh in, I'm not aware that occurs on a regular basis. We get 4 or 5 a month perhaps, but it's spread out and it's not a repeat call. The way I understand this fee to be built in is in the circumstance where we would have that, it would give the city the ability to bill for that, and it's built in more as an enforcement mechanism if it were to be needed.
Okay. And additionally, you mentioned as far as billing for insurance, for the insurance purposes or your traffic collisions, or when those fees would be, those costs would be recovered. Is that as far as I see that like an hourly rate, like a schedule for personnel, all the different fire personnel. So is that attached to those types of situations where there's insurance payments involved, or when you guys are responding to assist other agencies?
I believe to answer your question with an affirmative yes, if council adopted the cost recovery program and those allocations, it would allow the department, the city, to recover the exact cost associated with those instances of negligence and or accident where you could recover those costs if the city so chose, in terms of some of the long prolonged incidents. And I will tell you that personally I don't foresee it on the day-to-day. However, where I do see it being applicable and the council could control it is we've had, since I've been working for the city, we've had 4 different incidents where we've had commercial vehicles, commercial carriers, commercial petroleum or tanker carriers and or commercial vehicles that have been involved in a collision. It's resulted in a hazardous material release. We've been committed for hours upon hours, and therefore fire safety standby, life safety standby, while Caltrans and or CHP provides the cleanup, and our folks have been committed, and we've had no mechanism to recover our costs for the engine being on scene and or our staffing.
You're just being a nice guy is what you're saying.
Doing our duty, sir.
Yeah. I wasn't aware of that. That's definite need right now. It's, you know, to answer your question on alarms, I think the sheriff probably gets bothered more than anything else. I get false alarms all the time, but it's a wiring problem. I've had, you know, my offices with the girls have got panic alarms in them, and there'll be nobody in the office and they go off. All of a sudden I've got two sheriffs right below me come in, and, you know, and they look like they're ready for bear, and I said, wait a minute, guys. You know, I get a call and say, there's two sheriffs on their way there. I said, I know, I'm looking at them. So, and they respond very well to panics. But, you know, I've got all my buildings on my property have got alarms. And I get calls at 1 in the morning. I got to call the sheriff and tell him, no, there's nobody out there, don't worry about it.
But they haven't billed you yet?
Huh?
The sheriff's
No, they
department?
haven't.
Okay.
No, no, I've kept it down to, you know, I tried, you know, we don't get that many of them, but for a while there, we had 3 that they could have nailed me on one of them. You know, so, anyway.
I think that's all that I had for the fire chief. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have just a general question, and it's probably premature, but I'm assuming once we make our final decision on our fees, all that information is going to be on our website, and that'll be the public's notice of these fees, right?
Yeah, the fee schedule will be available on the website along with the actual fee study, so people will be able to find out not only what our fees are, but they'll be able to see the origin of those fees based on this on the information in this study that we have.
Because I'm sure we're going to get some questions.
Most likely, yes, especially for everything, you know, there's, you know, you look through that list and there's a lot of things that are new, so that's definitely going to be a part of it. But, you know, again, I think it's also important to note that, you know, these are fees that only incur for these specific services, right? So there's going to be a number of residents that are not impacted by these at all. As a matter of fact, I would argue that maybe they're being impacted positively because obviously the more costs we can recover from specific services, the less we need to use from general revenue to cover those costs.
I mean, I think today's meeting is perfect for that, because it's going to explain, and anybody who's watching our meeting or, you know, gets the report afterwards will have assurance that we've discussed everything.
Right. Yep.
No, but it's, on a fire, especially with all the fees that we're adding for sprinkler systems, for cost of the flows, we're checking to see if the systems are actually working. That gets overlooked a lot, you know, and that it's, if we're taking care of that in our own house, you know, you guys are the ones that have to answer those questions, and it's very important. And in here, we have so many new fees that, you know, it's going to help you as far as being able to cover yourself.
And maybe you bring up a great point on 2 levels. Number one, authorizing and recognizing and adopting a fee schedule doesn't mean that across the board that we're going to implement it and be charging
Correct.
line item just like going to the grocery store. Will's going to be weighing in. There's going to be a process, number one. And I've, on some of the alarms and some of those other things, we're talking frivolous responses when it's over the top, and it gives us the ability through the municipal code to recover. Number 2 is, as we continue to grow, and with those general fund dollars and the fire fund dollars that we all watch so carefully, with the adoption of our Fire Prevention Bureau, you know, we take a look at what activity that we have. I've been monitoring that regularly, and the ability to offset the costs that we're paying fire suppression, and basically we can have the ability to basically break even on what we're doing in those areas and offset costs, and it'll result in general fire fund and general fund dollars going back into suppression, and we can continue to bolster the Prevention Bureau. That's the vision that I've talked with Will and some of you about.
Anybody else on fire?
Yeah, I have a question too. So you said you didn't get reimbursement for the commercial vehicle fires. Does CAL FIRE get reimbursement, and how does that work?
So I can't speak to what CAL FIRE does per se, but I can tell you that I have turned down 3 different programs that allows the tracking for us to recover our costs associated with, and a laundry list of other agencies that do implement a cost recovery system. Now, to that point, generally cities, when it relates to cost recovery, don't charge their own citizens.
Right, right.
But those traveling through and whatnot, where it's makes sense, we recover the cost. And from the insurance companies, and we're not going after the people that live here. It's just those bigger incidents where it makes sense, where it's a long involved problem or process.
I also have another suggestion.
This is what this is for.
I mean, everybody loves our fire department. Why don't we do a fundraiser of some type? I mean, there's ones where they auction off the firemen to go have dinner with somebody, you know, like, I mean, something like that. I don't know if that's kind of...
Fireman's calendar.
Well, it doesn't have to be with your shirts off, but just, you know.
I will say that typically in those situations, I know what you're talking about. Typically in those situations, those are done through the association, and they're usually done as fundraisers for the fire association. Is that accurate?
That is, and we've done something similar. We've at some of the dinners and whatnot, the guys have auctioned off that very thing, cooking dinner. We've had folks come to the fire station, and we've made dinner for them at the fire station, different things over the years.
Just a thought. Thank you.
Chief, I just want to know, how were you part of the process of developing these fees and identifying the dollar amounts and the areas of needs, or was that purely our consultant group?
I did not.
Okay.
We're at the behest of the consulting group.
Right.
Jerry and I sat in with them, and I believe they have a formula, the metrics based on the industry standard.
Okay.
I will tell you, since this has kind of gone out, in some other projects that I'm working, I received feedback regarding the ability to charge more in a lot of areas, and you know, the guys that I rub elbows with at these conferences and stuff, you know, they're always about not leaving money on the table. This seems like, in my opinion only, it seems to be reasonable.
Well, that was my follow-up question. I wanted to hear your professional opinion on these fees, if you thought these were appropriate, if there was any omissions, if it seemed too much, too little, anything you want to share about any specifics on these?
I look at the team, where we're at, the age of the city, where we're at as a department, the demographics, and the future build-out. My personal outlook is we need to put things into place to continue to grow. We need to have things, the mechanism there for the councils and the leaders to come for this city to be able to capitalize and not have to go back and do the governance work behind it.
Right.
And so this is appealing to me.
Okay.
And I'll just add in general, we would, when we put these fees together, there were extensive conversations with all the staff members with the respective departments and the consultant, and so it combined their knowledge of what happens in other cities and what seems reasonable to what we're doing, and comparing those things to come up with a rate that matches our profile, using the hourly rates that are, you know, appropriate for those different fees. So who is involved, how much they're involved, how much time they spend. And then on top of that, then you know, factoring in the administrative costs, which we'll talk about later, those are all combined. So that's not just with fire, but that was in general. That's how we came up with all the fees.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right. So at this point, then we'll move on to building, and who will be? You can get him to the podium. Do you have a copy of the power? Yeah, you probably need that. There you go. So Ron Greider from Charles Abbott.
So I wasn't supposed to be here today. David, who had a go to the doctor's this afternoon, and he called me just in time. So building fees were based on valuation and also on deposits, which are hard, one, to defend because they get called into question a lot. And secondly, difficult to judge what that deposit should have been because it was a bit antiquated. The current study is based on type of construction, straight out of the building code, right? Occupancies, straight out of the building code, and then time study based on history and experience, right? So it's a more appropriate recovery of cost for the city, and some of the set fees that were done years ago didn't they were difficult to meet what the current actual time necessary to do those to do the actual work was. Also, given the time period in which the fees were studied before, there were a lot of new items like energy storage systems. There was no mechanism to recover that cost. Also, ADUs weren't a thing. So there's a few things that were added that the city did not have the ability to even, there was not even a mechanism to determine that cost at all. So based on a history and the work done from many other cities, we were able to determine what those costs to recover actually were.
Questions, anything? No, it's, there is a representative matrix here also, if you really want to throw rocks, but, it's, the fees in here, for the building fees, the permits and everything else, this has nothing to do with the other taxes. For example, schools. That's without it. Yeah. So, that's another big amount that hurts more than anything else, to tell you the truth. But no, but thank you.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
It might be, again, premature, but what about batteries and for looking at the state's working with to electrify everything?
So, and that's what I just mentioned earlier. There were things that weren't there before, like EV charging stations, energy storage systems, which are batteries. that's the and commercial. There was nothing in our previous codes. It were in the codes, but nothing in our previous fee studies that handled EV storage. I mean, electric vehicles, batteries, or electric storage systems, ESS. So.
Does that include maintenance of charging stations or anything commercial kind of thing?
No. So this is just plan review and installation thereof. I mean, with every business, like new construction, whether it's a storage system or an EV or a building, we just take in the plan. The fees are for the initial plan review and then for the inspection of its installation. Once some things are built, building never goes back for maintenance. That is on the owner. The only time building ever goes back is if someone's altering or adding on to. That's the only time building ever gets involved again, once it's completed.
Yeah, I was just asking because I was curious about, sometimes you're relying cars waiting for charge. And when the charging station doesn't work, what do you do?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
Anybody else? You lucked out.
And my apologies. Like I said, I just got this right before I came here.
Oh,
so-
no, you did fine, believe me. It's going back to fire. These storage units, are you guys getting trained on how to put out a fire?
We're looking at it. The technology is changing. Some of our East Coast partners, specifically the city of New York, Boston, some of the other suburban areas are seeing these EV fires significant fires daily, and the method to fight them, the technology is evolving. I can tell you, right now we're going to have a challenge today.
Yeah, I know it. That's all I was curious. You know, on the building side, I've installed several explosion walls all the way up to Santa Clara and down. You know, for different companies, and it's amazing that the building departments haven't got a clue what you're doing. You know, and and they're pretty explosive.
So the department that I worked at before with Chief Raposa, it's what we specialized in down in San Diego County. Those things are ferocious, and we've got a little bit of work to do. Not much, but we've got some work to do.
Yeah.
We've got some challenges ahead of us.
Okay.
Kind of piggyback on
Yeah.
it. Would that protect us also if you have to respond to a freeway collision, a truck carrying all those batteries and it catches fire? The same thing if they come in on train, if the train comes directly as well? Are we factoring that in too, so that if something like that happens, we have mechanisms in place to take care of it?
So to your point, Councilmember Molina, trains are a problem. I shouldn't say a problem. They're a challenge, and those relationships are key in reaching out, having those conversations, and knowing who's responsible for what and where to get those immediate resources. But yeah, it's changing so rapidly, and we're a little bit behind it because it's being forced down our throats. There's no other way to say it. It's forced at us. We're catching up, and we're trying to make inroads.
So we're looking at that.
But we are looking at it, absolutely.
Thank you, Ron, for pinch hitting. Appreciate it. No, I thank you for that. Next, we're going to go look at some of our planning fees, because obviously that is a big area for us as well, considering our growth. So, Kelly?
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. The Planning Department fee schedule contains two basic fee types. Flat fees are charged for small or routine projects that are expected to be straightforward and relatively simple to process. As a general rule of thumb, we expect that a flat fee project type will take less than about 10 hours of staff time to process. These types of permits include temporary use permits and other minor permits. The other fee type shown on the PowerPoint there before you is for deposit-based fees. These are for permit types that are complex, more technical in nature, and are expected to require substantive staff time. These types of permits include development plan reviews, conditional use permits, and zone changes. You'll note within the staff report and draft user fee study that a number of fees were eliminated, condensed, or otherwise consolidated within the planning fee schedule. The intention with not only the planning department, but I think the whole intention of the study is to simplify and streamline the process for our users. Another item of note captured within the planning department is the general plan maintenance fee. This is a fee that accounts for long-range planning activities such as the general plan, zoning, and housing element updates, which, as you know, we're currently going through. Historically, the city has charged the general plan maintenance fee based on valuation of projects. And within this new fee study, the general plan maintenance fee is recommended to be a percentage of building permit fee and would be applied only to major building permits such as new construction, a remodel, or tenant improvements. With that, I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Anybody? You look like you really want to talk. I'll talk right now.
I don't know whose problem this question is, but as far as the credit card fee, maybe Will knows, that was showing like an increase, or for the full cost was like 5% or something for a credit card fee.
Yep.
What is, I don't know what system do we use, and what is the actual like amount that the company charges us to run a credit card here?
Yeah, so, well, Celeste, do you want to maybe explain that one? I think basically what it is, and I'll have you, clarify. But essentially, we've seen an increase in credit card fees in general for merchants because of all these reward programs. So these credit card companies do not do these reward programs out of the goodness of their heart. They pass that charge on to the merchants. So people use their card. They don't pay, if they pay off their bill every month, they don't pay interest, right? So something has to pay for those rewards. That's what's paying for those rewards is the merchants. So we've seen an increase in credit card fees as a result of that. So every time, we swipe a card through, there's a flat fee plus a percentage. And so it just depends on that volume. And I think they also have, there's, cost recovery. There's a different fee if you key in a card versus swipe it versus put it in with a chip, because all of those have different risk factors for fraud. So the most highest risk for fraud is a keyed in card. So that's where you see your highest percentage of fraud. So if you key in something, it's going to be higher than if you use like a chip or the radio, the RFID type of thing built into the card. So, but that's basically a calculation of our volume of transactions versus what we've actually paid for our merchant fees, and it's a percentage of that. I think that the convenience factor definitely needs to be. We're just presenting the information, and that's what the calculation came out to be. I don't think we're recommending that to be at that level because there is a cost for handling cash and checks as well, and there's no fee for that, but we do have a cost for that in terms of loss prevention and things like that on our end. The credit card's probably the safest method of payment in terms of taking stuff in. So I would say that I would recommend that we probably set it at a higher rate than we have now. I think I was just at the CDU Kaipa. I think, Mike, do you remember what their fee was? Like 3.5%, I think, right? So they're charging 3.5%. So I think that would be a reasonable standard. I think if we were going to look at
But
changing that.
you're working at a loss.
You are.
It's, you guys can probably get a better deal than I can as far as negotiating the costs and the percentages. And, I've had to pay up to 15% on, say, $10,000 purchase from a company I'm doing business with or something like that. And that's where the big difference is. I was curious on the volume, and can you tell us, Elise, about what kind of volume you're dealing with?
So I apologize, I don't have the volume specifically off the top of my head, but to answer your first question, Councilmember Manley, we did a calculated 3-year average of actual costs, and to be sure, 5.14% is on the higher side. We recently, within the last 12 months, maybe it's been 15 months now, renegotiated our credit card fees to a lower rate. Yeah. They're still not coming in at 1.5%, 2%, but they have contracted down and they are lower based on our volume of activity. Because I think when we first engaged with the Bank of America, volume is anticipated to be a little higher. So when we were going through all of our banking relationships, we did some analysis and we concluded, yeah, these are really high for City of Calimesa. So they brought it down. So that's factoring in that we had about a full 2-year cycle of relatively higher rates. So it's pushing up probably our average of the 3 years, but it was for direct specific costs because it's a segregated line item of what we have to pay every month. So we were able to just print a report, look at the volume, here's the ratio, and so it was relatively straightforward to look at. For comparative purposes, the report did include some other surrounding areas and jurisdictions and what their credit card fees are. And we have Beaumont, which calculates at 2%, Hemet, which calculates at 3%, and Redlands charges 4%. And then, of course, you just heard Ukaipa had 3.5%. And to the mayor's point, I'm quite sure none of these cities or agencies are fully cost recovering the credit card fees, but it's a little bit of that sweet spot. We want to be reasonable to people. We all go out into, and work with businesses. It's not unusual that you'll see a 3% fee, 3.5%. I haven't seen 4 or 5% too frequently. I've even gone to some businesses that say we're not even doing credit cards anymore. We don't want to pay the fees. I've worked with, in my profession, I've served other clients and been exposed to quite a few credit card fees, and 4%, even going back maybe 5 to 7 years ago, was pretty average. It's quite high. It's a chunk off of it's a lot. So any space between the 2.5% and 5.14% of cost recovery would be reasonable, whatever conclusion it is you all come to. Did that answer your questions? Would you like any more data?
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Lucia, it looked like all the flat fees were losers. How come it's gone so long without changing those? I couldn't figure out what flat fees were, to tell you the truth, and you explained it very well.
Sure. So I don't have the specific information on why it took us so long to update the fee schedule. I think it's well past due, and we're actually moving over, just to kind of hone in on one of the changes that's being proposed here today. One permit that has historically been a flat fee is what's called a minor development plan review. So that's if you want to build a shed, one single family home, an outbuilding of some kind, you can get a staff level approval, kind of over the counter permit, just walk into the planning office and apply to build your one house. So we had one flat fee. It was about $800 for that. Throughout the years, we've seen tremendous variation of project complexity. So that $800 is meant to capture a very straightforward, easy project, and unfortunately, it has needed to capture very, very complex projects that take a tremendous amount of not only my time, but the city engineer, public works, and other departments. And so one of the changes you'll see recommended here is to move that category into the deposit-based, where folks are really paying for the services that they're incurring.
Yeah, well, I know the development there at Cherry Valley with the stores and everything else was an eye-opener as far as how much money we were losing in inspection. We're way behind in the times, and it's taken a whole lot longer to do it than, and it's not because of the people that are doing it, it's just that's the cost. So this is really needed.
So Kelly, just so I understand the deposit-based fees, so you basically, after the service, you bill them, like an itemized bill to recoup?
The way that we do that is based on our assumed amount of time. I'll just pick a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
So say somebody needs to apply for a conditional use permit because they want to open a tattoo shop in the city. So we say, okay, we think it'll take X number of staff time, hours, to work on this. So we'll get a deposit up front of however much. I think we're reducing a personal services fee in the recommendation here. But if it's, say, for an alcohol permit, historically it's been $10,000 to apply for an alcohol permit. We charge our time weekly, so if I spend 5 or 10 hours a week on that conditional use permit, the fee is taken out of the deposit. And so it's kind of a living deposit, wherein if at the end of the project there are funds left over, a refund can go out. And conversely, if throughout the course of the project we use all the money, there's still services that need to be rendered, we may ask for deposit replenishment. So it's kind of this constant ebb and flow with deposits.
And that's on a case-by-case basis, given the project?
Yes. There's a lot of variability. Some projects are very straightforward, and maybe they'll get a big refund at the end. Maybe there's a ton of complex issues, and we have to ask for replenishments on a pretty regular basis.
But we try to give them as accurate of an estimate up front as we
Absolutely.
can,
Yes. Planning and finance are always coordinating on deposit replenishments and amounts, and if they're reasonable or not.
Thank you.
And then I'd just like to also add to that with respect to the deposits, that one of the elements that the fee study does do is it standardizes the initial deposit request. So it's not subject to as much determinability and estimation. It's really clearly laid out. Again, boding well for those who want to transact and do business in our city. They can look at it and say, okay, so for this, they're going to ask for initial deposit of $20,000, $15,000, $5,000. And just to follow up on what Kelly was mentioning, more oftentimes than not in our engagement and working, we're usually asking for quite a few more deposit replenishments. We're very, we want to be really respectful that we're not over asking our community to pay a lot of money up front. We don't want to strip people of unnecessary cash flow and what they need. So we try and work really, really close together. And so if we get within, you know, $1,000, okay, this project's still rocking and rolling, we still have quite a bit to do, we'll ask for our second level of deposit. So we're really managing it, and we are very respectful to our community, that we just don't ask for a huge deposit up front because it's easy, and, you know, we don't want to, you know, that's not how we do business here in Calimesa.
But we also make sure, though, that we do seek that additional deposit before we completely depleted the funds as well, so that we're not in a situation where we've overspent the deposit and now they owe us for those services. It does happen time. It's just, you know, something happens in the course of business, but we try to prevent that as much as possible. Yeah, like Celeste's point, to try to strike the balance.
Are licensed contractors and residents charged the same fees? It's very flexible, whatever it applies. There's no special rules for licensed contractors versus people from the community. It's always the same.
So within the planning department, we're talking about pre-entitlement, pre-construction fees. So there's no differentiation on whether or not somebody is a contractor. Perhaps within the building fee schedule, I'm not sure.
No.
There's not.
No, there's not. I mean, the schedule lays out what the fees are, and the fee is what the fee is, regardless of who pays for it. Because sometimes, you know, people may work with their contractor that, you know, the person doing the improvements pays it directly, and other times they have their contractor do it for them. But regardless of how that happens, they're charged the same fee, because it costs us, ultimately, it's us providing the service, right, regardless of who's asking us to provide the service.
Yeah, we're not trying to raise money off anyone.
Correct.
Mm.
Right.
Moving on.
Okay, so another surcharge fee that is being added is what is called the technology surcharge fee. And let me log back into my thing here real quick. So this fee will support our software solutions that will allow us to streamline our processes, not only internally but also for our customers. So online platforms, things like that. More and more cities and more contractors have a preference to do things online, reduce the trips that they have to make to the office here, and be able to submit things electronically. So setting the fee as a percentage of the building fee is an industry standard, and it also scales what people pay. So somebody that comes in for a $100 permit will pay less than somebody that comes in for a $1,000 permit, for example. The nexus here is that the permitting software exists primarily to process these types of transactions. Therefore, they should pay for the cost of procuring and maintaining that software. So that's what the technology surcharge fee is specifically, and it is set at 5% of building permit fees. Going on to the next page, there's some other categories here that are relatively minor. The city clerk section was actually significantly reduced. Some stuff was moved to finance, other things were eliminated, and basically only includes now copies of various types of documents. The finance didn't have a lot of changes, but business license is probably the most significant, and we have another slide on that after this one. And then on the code enforcement, a couple of new fees were added: site investigation, weed abatement, and abandoned vehicles. So the weed abatement is to further support our fire prevention program. And then the public works, a few new fees under the encroachment permits. Mostly fees are currently under recovered, so we're seeing increases in those fees because currently they are underpriced at this point. So taking a look at business license specifically, Chapter 5.05 of the Calimesa Municipal Code covers business licenses, and most of the current chapter was adopted upon Calimesa becoming a city in 1990. And so this particular section will require further review. We've been working with our city attorney's office to kind of revamp how we want to go, what direction we want to go with business license. Right now, the code calls for us to adopt a business license tax by resolution, and back in 1990, that might have been okay. By today's standards, we may need to change that. So we're looking at our options to change that. But I think it's important for us to keep a registration of our businesses on file, especially for the fire department, so they know what types of businesses are out there, and we know what's going out there, not only for basically particularly our public safety departments. So one thing that we are going to recommend, though, right away, regardless of what we do going forward, is right now we have a doubling of the fee of the business license tax for outside businesses. Our recommendation is to eliminate that and have them pay as the same as inside, because that's essentially an excise tax. Right now, the municipal code specifically calls that out, but we're recommending that we don't enforce that at this point until we finalize what we're going to do with business license. So that's something we will include going forward. Right now, our business license tax is a flat $24, regardless of what type of business, and it's $48 for out-of-town businesses. So like I said, we'll bring that down to 24.
Well, I thought 24 was a loser.
It is a loser, but because it's classified as a tax, it's not necessarily a cost recovery thing at this point. And so we're looking at our options to, what would that look like to make it a quote-unquote business registration and maybe make that a fee-based. But there's some legal challenges with that, and there's been some cities that have faced some challenges in doing it that way. So we just want to make sure that we vet it correctly so that, number one, our fees are defendable, and that we're doing things according to the law. So that's one things we're still continuing to work on. And we talked about the credit card fee already, so I had that as an item here. So the cost allocation plan, although we're on the higher side for cities, I think 25% is what we calculated as our full cost recovery rate. So this is our percentage for administrative charges that we charge onto things. It's built into currently our fees that we have presented to you. Obviously, if this changes, obviously it would change our fees a little bit, slightly down if we did not go with full cost recovery with that. Currently, we charge 10%, and that's just a standard rate that has been established through grant programs. They say you can use a de minimis 10% for your administrative charge unless you can show that your charges or costs are higher. So with that, it can go anywhere from 10%. Obviously, I would not recommend we leave it at 10%. It can go from anywhere up to 25%, though. So that's one of the discussions that we want to have with council in terms of how we want to adopt that administrative overhead rate. And also, it does impact how we charge out for fully burdened rates as well. So just keep that in mind. So looking ahead, the California Business Roundtable Initiative, it's something that we discussed with council sometime last year. That initiative will be on the ballot in 2020, on the November 2024 ballot. And it could impact our fee structure. Although we do believe the fees being proposed are well supported by the study. But if the initiative does pass, there are some things that will probably need to be defined. It'll probably be defined by court proceedings because there's some question as to what things may mean. And so usually those end up in court, and the court will interpret what those things actually mean, and then that's how we then interpret going forward. So the minimum cost of providing a service, for example, I think is one thing that we're really kind of wondering, okay, well, what does that mean? Because if you look at our cost recovery rates, right, we're presenting all these different costs for these user fees. It's the reasonable cost, right? This is what our average cost is versus do they mean the easiest type of permit in this situation? What's the cost of that? That's your level that you can charge at. Something could be between one and, it could take as little as 1 hour, as much as 3 hours, but typically it'll take about 2. We'll set the rate at 2, right? We'll use 2 hours as the metric to determine that fee. Well, they may come back and say that, well, if you think it can be done as little as 1, then you have to use 1 hour of time. So these are the kind of things that probably would need to be vetted out if this does pass. I don't think, because someone inevitably will challenge under it. They'll say you're overcharging based on this new law. It'll go to court, and then the court will decide whether that's the case or not. So those are things that we'll have to wait and see, but I think it'll probably take several years before that's the case, and then by the time we know what that means, we'll probably be studying this again anyway. So hopefully that is the case. In terms of implementation date, we're still shooting for a July 1st effective date, but we believe that looking at our current systems we have in place, that we should be able to charge most of these. I think the wild card's going to be on the fire side in terms of setting up that mechanism, because they are brand new fees. But we are going to integrate that into our permitting software. We're currently actively looking into options for that, and I'm hoping to bring a recommendation to the council in the next few months to select a permitting software and go forward with it. So be on the lookout for that. So based on the feedback today, we'll finalize the fee structure with Matrix and hope to have it back to you for the February 20th meeting for adoption. So at this point, that concludes staff's presentation. So we'd be happy to answer any other questions the council may have. And if you want to have any clarification on, policy direction from staff, we can also help facilitate that as well. And of course, all of our panelists are available to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Anything?
So, just I guess a broad question related to the full cost recovery versus other approaches. I mean, the way that I'm seeing it, and I don't know if I'm completely understanding it, that makes the most sense to me, is putting the number as close as we can to full cost recovery. I look at that as having more money to do other services for our city. Pavement management, as we know, our cities desperately need more money for roads, other services and amenities in our city. So the more that we can recover from costs, I think the better. So that's kind of like the big picture. I would support that. I'd like to hear what others have to say about that and other perspective. But I guess my question about that is, what's the potential negative for the city? Is there any repercussions for charging, say, full cost recovery in terms of, legal otherwise, or is it just?
Legally, certainly not.
Okay.
Because obviously we can charge up to our full cost. We just can't charge more than that. The only thing, the only negative ramifications could be for existing fees. If they are going up significantly, I'm just looking, just kind of perusing through. The advantage we have right now is that we're adding so many new fees. There's really nothing to compare it to. So when you're looking at, do you want to increase it to full cost recovery over time, that would probably more apply to fees that are already in place. And if you look at them, it's kind of a mixed bag of where the fees are going, right? In terms of the percentage increase relative to the inflation over the last 10 years. And so if you look at some of them are actually dropping. Other ones are only going up maybe 9-10%, which 10% over a 10-year period is actually pretty good. There are a few that are increasing a pretty good amount, but those are pretty isolated cases. So I think for us, we're in probably a good position to be able to move to full cost recovery with not a huge impact on existing fees and existing users of those fees.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
So.
Okay.
Matrix, I like your data. I like your numbers. I'm just curious on, are they based on this state or across the United States, or I know you use the local cities and things like that, but I didn't even notice where you guys are based out of.
Well, we're headquartered in California, and our office is just down the street, in Irvine, so just an hour or so away from you guys. But the actual fees calculated are based on Calimesa's cost, because in order for it to be legally defensible, it has to be based on the city's actual cost being incurred rather than anything else. But Yes, when we're reviewing it for reasonableness and making sure that we're not missing any fees or missing any trends, we do want to make sure we're taking into account what's happening in California, and then we do look outside of California sometimes if there's something unique to the jurisdiction that could be more reflective of outside of California. So we take all of that into consideration.
No, I see things from across the United States as far as bid sheets and things like that. Use our product and everything else. They're in a totally different world. You know, and that's where you have to be more in tune with. You know, we're different than New York. New York is their own little world.
Definitely.
You know, and so it's no, that's what I was curious about.
Yeah, no, we start with what your guys' costs are and what your process is, because it has to be specific to that in order for it to be the most defensible. Because what happens, the fee should be based off of how Calimesa is providing that service, not, you know, how Menifee or Riverside County or anybody else is doing it. It's, in order for it to be fair to your residents and defensible to them, it has to be based on what the cost is that you all are incurring.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Sure. I think I'll start with some of these smaller ones first. So as far as the alarm thing, I guess my recommendation on that would be just looking at the fine scale, I guess. The first response, there's automatically a fine, so I'd rather prefer see maybe for the first response there would be no fine, be zero, and maybe kind of slide that down, because the penalty increases for each false response. So eliminate the first one, or you wouldn't automatically, first time you have a false alarm, you're automatically getting fined by the city. Doesn't seem as reasonable to me, so I'd probably eliminate that, slide the rest down. So if they want to, if it's something egregious where it's something that's repetitive, then I understand the need. That's a normal thing, but so I'd maybe just adjust that a little bit there.
I actually, on that point too, I think it's important to note that that is actually good clarification too, probably to make, is this is a penalty, not necessarily a fee. So there's a little more flexibility with that. So that is actually a good point to bring up, because, so yeah, for the first, so we can just say, we can set those and we can slide those down so that if you have first response, no charge. Second response is $387, third is $773,
right, yeah, that's what I
and
mean,
then once you get to 5 or more, then you get to the last one. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we can
like the sheriff,
we can
just don't
change that.
show
If
up.
that's
Yeah, they yeah. No, well, that's they won't come if they continue to get fraudulent calls.
That's right, true.
Yeah.
But moving on to the credit card thing, I think I'd probably be okay with 3.5%, like Will kind of said. The full 5% seems a little high for me, so if we went 2.5 to 3.5, that'd be more comfortable with that. And then the big one, as far as just our overall cost recovery rate. Maybe before we get to that, another thought I had is, as we're doing other programs for some of these businesses, we're trying to find ways to support our local businesses, as we've done on these other programs. But I think this would be an opportunity to maybe pick out some of these fees and try to keep some of these fees down for some of these local businesses. We know they're going to impact them, so we have these new fees, or instead of increasing these fees. So instead of doing something like, say, the gift card program, where this could kind of be the same thing, where you're targeting a reduction in very specific fees, that would, that there's going to be increase in essentially tax for these businesses, because they're going to have these fees are going to impact them. So we can maybe pick out some of those fees to specifically bring them down or keep them lower. So I think that might be a good thing to do. And
Are you talking about the licensing, or?
Well, license is one, but there's all these different, some of the there's other fire fees. There's a long list of fees. So I probably would just kind of defer to staff maybe to take a closer look at that with their expertise and say what would make the most sense if we're trying to target some of these same businesses that we were helping before. How can we apply that same mindset to these fees, to where they're not they're keeping their costs down a little bit through this fee schedule. So we're trying to support them a little bit and lower their overall cost to operate business in the city. And that can get complex, I guess. There's a lot of different ways to do that. I don't have like a list that I handpicked out to accomplish that goal, but it's an opportunity to try to work that in right now as you know, or at the next meeting if we wanted to try to accomplish something like that.
Well, it's, you know, do you want to subsidize the world or do you want to break even?
Well,
You know, we aren't here to make money. We're here to, you know, provide a service for X amount of dollars. And, you know, anything that we subsidize, that comes out of our general fund. You know, and that's now we're trying to pave roads and things like that. Well, if it isn't there, and really it isn't, I don't think it's a huge amount, to tell you the truth, that it would cost us if we did lower a few things. But, you know, it's just like business licenses. You know, you can't believe what these other cities charge. You know, for me to do any work in another city, I've got to get a business license. And it's, I'm talking $1,000 versus $48. You know, it's, this is for any reason, I don't know what, but that's what they like hitting you. No, that's just to pour a concrete square or something like that.
Can I ask a clarifying question on your recommendation there? Are you specifically looking at things that are like the annual type of
Yeah, like,
things?
for example, like say like the industrial oven, right, where there's an annual fee to inspect it. This fire, it's a new fee
Right.
on there, right? So, you know, how many businesses, so you know, within Calimesa are operating this, right? Some of our restaurants or something like that. So that's like one thing you could do, right? If you're trying to support these local restaurants or something where you can very specifically target certain fees so that you know we're going to have an impact, because there's only so many businesses in the city that are going to have an industrial oven that's going to have to pay the annual fee. So anyways, it's just thought I had a verse. It's very similar to, like, say, you know, the gift card program where it's very targeted and specific to certain businesses. The same thing could be accomplished. This, if we're, you can craft it, you know, however we wanted to try to accomplish a similar goal. That's kind of all I'm saying. So it's kind of wide open to interpretation as far as how we did that. But I'll move on from that. If anybody else wants to add to that. I think overall for the cost recovery being so we're at 10% and the highest being the 25 or the recommendation for full cost recovery. I'd be more comfortable being lower than the 25%. I certainly think we need to increase it to recover more of that cost, but I wouldn't want to get the full 25%. You know, I would like to be somewhere significantly lower than 25, just as far as the overall percentage that we're looking at.
Yeah.
In a state full of, or country full of fees, this is a hard one for me, but I see where we're going with it. And I kind of feel more the way John does, but I mean, we don't want to subsidize everything, but we want to be business friendly and not jack up the prices and say, hey, you know, this is what it is and you're just going to have to pay it. We want to support our businesses and our people. It's hard already living here in California. And I'm not going to go into a big long lecture, but I did have another question. How often does this have to be studied? I mean, we haven't done it for a while, but on a regular basis, what is a regular basis? Every year, every 2 years, every 4 years?
It's typically, well, there's two ways to look at it. The full-fledged study of actually, you know, breaking down all of your fees and looking at that, best practice is probably 5 years. But what we've done is we you know, Calimesa is not alone in this. The city I came from actually, before they did an update, I think in 2018, I think, and there were some fees that hadn't been increased since 2004 before that. So there's, this is not an uncommon thing of cities getting behind on this. But the thing that the other thing that we're building into this is the ability to increase on an annual basis so that we're not having to make significant jumps. Because now that we're adding all these fees, we have an obligation to kind of try to keep up with inflation over time, so that if we study this in 5 years, we're not having to increase things 25% all at once because we didn't increase it incrementally over time. So that's so not only are you looking at it comprehensively every 5 years, that's the recommendation, but then annually you're increasing it by CPI. So our recommended resolution will include our ability to increase it. That's still going to be at council's discretion, but we'll have the ability, based on a resolution, to increase those fees. So we're looking at increasing the fees annually, but then actual comprehensive look at actually how long it takes to do each of the individual things, that would probably be every 5 years. Although, we could look at things, 2 or 3 years from now and say, we've added staff, or, the way we've done things has changed. We need to look at this again, sooner. We can do that as well. But I think going longer than 5 years, you do run a risk of the fees getting out of sync with how you actually are providing services, because things do change and we evolve, and we get more efficient. And if we do get more efficient on things, then obviously the public should benefit from that. So.
That's why I would like to see it every 3 years for the time being, just for staying ahead of it. And if there are changes, and yeah, you can lower it. If we're, all of a sudden we're doing things different, we have different programs, we have different things of approaching, different things, and then you can make the changes and adjust. And I'm adjusting continually. But I'm not as big as the city, so it's all right.
So, sorry, Linda, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm a budget person, and we have such a small staff, and I see this as perfect timing. Number one, we're making sure that we're in compliance with all the state, the unfunded state mandates, and what have you. But this is also a budget tool. A lot of times your departments, you don't realize how much time individual staff persons are spending on specific items. So I see this as a tool for the fire department. For every department, everyone wears several hats. I see this as an opportunity for better budget planning. You kind of see where you're going as far as in future staff increases, and it's transparent. We're upfront. We're showing what it is it takes to run the city. Our audits show that we're financially sound. We don't make crazy decisions, and we're not backpedaling ever. I see this as a great budget tool and a great planning tool, and I think this is the perfect time to do it. There was a lot to read. We've read every single page, but it all makes sense. We're behind because we're just now growing. Our city is just now growing after several years of not growing, very fast, keeping up with the Joneses and cities next to us. But I think like the mayor said, we're not out to make money off of our residents. We're basically just making sure we do good business. And I see this as a perfect opportunity. And again, it's a tool to, keep us in line with where we might be needing staff persons down the road. The fire department's been doing that from day one, since 2018, is planning for future staff increases. And actually, I see it as for supervisors, for knowing who's doing the work and how I guess to have equity in what you do every day. Everybody seems very happy to work here. Everyone's always smiling. So happy to see that. But I think our audit showed that we're fiscally sound. I think we're making good decisions, and I see this as a budget tool. I think it's great. I know it's always painful to increase fees for we'll be paying the same fees, but I think we're really looking at everything, with a fine tooth comb, and we're making adjustments where we can, and I think we've made some good decisions, and have trust in staff, and have trust in the researchers to do a very sound data, so I'm happy.
Some good points, Linda. I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think to remember that the fees aren't a tax, they're not a profit that the city's trying to make. It's just the cost of doing business so that we can operate effectively and efficiently. And so, but to John's point and Wendy's point, I share the sentiment of wanting to be mindful of our businesses and be pro-business. And I think a way to do that, though, is to have a percentage like close to 25% that allows for full cost recovery, and then maybe we can augment some of or adjust some of the fees for businesses accordingly, right? That allows us to have more pro-business policies or programs like we did with the gift card program or something. Maybe we can look at some of those, John, as the fees that you were proposing on a case-by-case basis and decide, hey, look, since we're recovering 100% of our expenses in these areas, this allows us now to maybe for new businesses in our community, we can have a slightly more generous approach, right? For the first, I don't know how we define new business, 5 years or something. I don't know. Maybe we can come to some kind of compromise, but I don't know. I'd like to hear what Will and maybe Celeste says about, from a budgetary perspective, if we can do both, right? Maybe are we going to subsidize the expenses of some of these businesses and also not fully recoup adequate expenses, that for our city? It doesn't seem like it's wise to do both, but I think if we do recoup majority of our expenses, close to 25%, that does open the door to do some of the things that you're suggesting. At least that's the way I'm seeing it. I'd like to hear maybe from a budgetary perspective if that's a possibility, or from a fee even perspective, if we can do that.
So a couple of things on that. I was just asking the chief right now if the inspections the annual inspections we're talking about, we're already performing those and we're not charging for them, right? So we're adding a fee to be able to start recovering that cost. So anything that we add right now, I think will be beneficial, because obviously we're charging zero right now, right? So.
And to weigh in with that, I'd like to make the point, we're talking about residential, and then we get into commercial, light commercial, and industrial. And some of these hits, and I think to Councilmember Manley's point, if we take a look into some of those areas, in those industrial areas, and then we go back to how we're zoned, and all of the overlay zone, and it's all applicable back to that overlay zone and what we have right now, and it details down in that commercial and the residential. In my opinion, it is built to be friendly towards those mom and pop places. And then we're looking at those larger places. We've dealt with something, planning and engineering and fire have dealt with some significant engineering challenges over the last 6 months. This gives us the mechanism to enforce and follow through with some of that, because there's some people out there don't like to play well and follow the rules, and this gives us that ability to govern that and still be sensitive to, look, we're all sensitive to the mom and pop places, and we want businesses here, and big boxes coming our way, and so is light industry, or at least that's what it looks like. And this gives us the tools to let them pay for that infrastructure that we have been building towards. That's just my 2 cents in how this is laid out. And
the maybe something that can guide this discussion would be if you look in your packet on page 326. There is a chart there that talks about typical cost recovery by department. And so that may be helpful in terms of, and some of these, so as you make your way there, You notice that some of them are on the low side, specifically on the finance and city clerk side. These tend to be lower. A lot of times that's because those are mandated fees, right? So the government code actually states you can only charge X for this type of service, regardless of what the actual cost is. And you typically will see that more on the finance and city clerk side, which is why you see those lower percentages. So if you notice on fire, which is what we're talking about here, we're in the 50 to 80% range. So it would not be out of the ordinary if we did not do full cost recovery on fire. Obviously, we want to, our goal is to try to fully fund as much as we can our Fire Prevention Bureau, because it does have a lot of ancillary benefits to the community by having those things in place. And we want to make sure, but on the other hand, there is benefit that the general public receives by these annual inspections taking place, because it does prevent fires from happening, and it does address safety issues that might not otherwise be addressed, which then obviously benefits the general public. So that's why you see that nexus of sometimes not having full cost recovery in those items, because there is a mixture of specific benefit, because obviously the business has to do that in order to run their business. But there also is a general benefit, because now these businesses are safer for the general public, and therefore they get a benefit from that. So there are different ways to look at it, but I think that this is maybe a helpful way to look, maybe frame that to kind of look at what other governments may do.
And Kushbu, I'd like to add with respect to the cost allocation ratio of the 25%, that is built into every single fee that has been calculated, correct?
Yes, so the indirect cost has been built in, and the 25% is a separate percentage. So when we looked at the indirect cost that's built in for each fee, it's more specific to the service area. So planning's rate includes kind of the direct overhead specific to planning. Engineering's includes the direct overhead. The 25% is more of a citywide rate, so when there are multiple departments billing to those deposit accounts, then you can utilize that rate. So the 25% is kind of more generic, applicable kind of citywide, versus kind of the more specific indirect that's built into each fee. So even if you chose to not go to the full 25%, it shouldn't impact your ability to have to change the other fees, because that's more specific. They're indirect. So in some departments it may be less than 25%, in some departments it's greater than 25%, that indirect component.
So it's more applicable to the deposit-based
Correct.
Fees. Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't impact any of those small businesses in theory, because it's more about those large land use, engineering, subdivision type of projects that are kind of hitting those real-time billing accounts.
So hypothetically, if we went to 20%, how would that impact these fees and these different typical cost recovery ranges and so forth?
It wouldn't impact any of the flat fees. All it would do is, so instead of recovering for the full indirect on a deposit, you would just be recovering less on the deposit-based fees.
Okay.
So just impact those particular line items.
And I will add, there are two cost allocation plans in here. One is our full cost allocation plan for full recovery, and then there's other one called the Office of Management and Budget compliant cap, which is what would get applied to federal grants, and that rate was calculated at 18.6%. So that actually might be a good middle ground if you want to go less than the 25%, because then we could then just use that as a standard rate across the board. Since that's something we can only use that for federal grants anyway. Administratively, that actually might work out better also, just because it's obviously within the 25%, it's lower than that, so we're allowed to charge it. But then, it would just set one rate. I don't know, that's just a maybe suggestion to think about too, and it just happens to fall right in that 10 to 25% range as well.
And then with respect to budgetary impact, I think there's a schedule you've probably all seen, but just so we're all on the same page, I believe it was calculated that we under-recovered $111,000, is that correct? And those were just for fees that were absolutely determinable. Most of our fees in here are new, as you don't, not to belabor it, but with respect to the fire department. So it would have been, it wasn't really terribly responsible to do a lot of projections out for data that hadn't been tracked and so forth. So apples to apples, if these fees had been in place in prior fiscal year, we would have had an additional 111,000 collected. And Kushbu, would you mind mentioning, we talked a lot about cost recovery and that it's not a tax. Would you mind just providing the code reference in the section with respect to California and legal mandates whereby we're not allowed to make a profit on any fees, so everybody is clear, even those who I know the council members know this, but for people who are the general public who are listening, we're not allowed to make a profit on our fees.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of propositions, Prop 26, Prop 218. There's a couple government codes, 66014, 66016. So they all state essentially the same thing, that you cannot charge more than it costs to provide a service. So when we're looking at user fees, it's our job to ensure that we are calculating that fully kind of justifiable cost associated with those services. So we don't just throw in any old costs that kind of we can layer on there. We also want to make sure there's a relatability to that service that's being provided. So when we do include a portion of council's cost or a portion of Will's cost or Celeste, it's because they are providing that support to city departments. But we don't include a portion of like public works costs associated with managing the solid waste contract, because that's a service to the public. That's not a service internally to city staff. So when we're looking at calculating the full cost of the service, we're making sure it's directly relatable to the service that's being provided.
That's a good point. So I think that was an excellent point that you brought up, though, that there was potentially lost revenue of over $100,000, perhaps even more when you calculate in the new fees that weren't allocated. We're looking at 200 to 250,000 conservatively. I would say perhaps. That's another street we could have paved in Calimesa. That's a whole nother. That's more pavement that we could have done. That's more activities we could have did for our community. That's a lot of revenue. And so it's not about making more money. It's about doing more for our community, and not just subsidizing people who are, doing things in our city. So 18.6, Will. I mean, that's a better than what we're doing here. I still would like to not leave money on the table for the good of our community. I'd like to see, like I said, we could have paved another road in this city with that much money. Our residents would really appreciate if we could do more for our community, and this is a way that we could do more.
Yeah, but it's like John, he was saying with the hoods and things like that, you can be selective, with your 18.6. You don't have to go across the board. It's just, and I agree with him in that respect. I've watched enough of those things when I was working in that industry, and it's, but it's every nickel anymore, especially in that industry, is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And we can look at that.
Okay, so based on that direction, I will look at some of those annual fees specifically, and look at maybe looking at that chart that we looked at with for the percentage of cost recovery. Would you like to maybe use that as kind of a basis of where we kind of target our fees? Mm-hmm. Okay, we will do that. We'll work on that, and we'll have that ready to go. We'll shoot for February 20th. We may have to push it to the first meeting in March, but we'll do our best to get it back on the February 20th.
Okay, we're all done. Look at that smile off your face. Now I get to go home. You guys, you got anything you want to add to us here, or any little statements of happiness and whatever? Anybody here?
I I just wanted, is that all the direction you needed, Will? Was did you need any more with regards to the credit card fee at this point or anything like that? I think we mentioned
Do we,
3.5%.
is 3.5%, is there any, I don't know if there's any objections to that. I think we have consensus on that.
I think I'm in agreement with that.
Okay. We'll start there, you know, and again, we're gonna try to look at these on an annual basis too. And so, you know, we do, like I said, we have a built-in CPI factor in the resolution, which will allow us to, you know, when we adopt this fee, you know, these fees, we'll be able to look at these on an annual basis. So we'll look at inflation. We'll try to keep up with inflation as we go. And then, you know, the council may decide, you know, if let's say inflation was 5%, we're like, we don't want to increase things 5%. We only do 3%. You can do that. So you'll have the flexibility to do that. It's not going to be automatic. So our plan would be to, as part of the budget process, bring those forward and update the fees as of July 1, just to make sure that it's in sync with the budget. In that way, we're bringing it all at one time. So again, that's why we targeted July 1st as our go live date for this, and then annually July 1st we would have any increases effective at that point.
Okay.
I just want to thank you guys. You know, I felt like I was going to the dentist today. Sorry, but it was pretty good. You guys presented everything pretty well, and you always make it easy. You know, you guys always put everything out there and make it plain, easy to read. And I just want to thank you guys.
Well, some of us aren't as intelligent as you are, so I gotta fight it.
Thank you all.
Yeah. And the only thing I wanted to say was if anybody from the chamber's listening, that they did an excellent job. And I think everybody had a good time, and the food was fantastic. You know, that's some of the best catering I've seen with all the different fiascos I have to go to. So.
Well, that was the house bistro.
Yeah,
So,
house, yeah.
so you know,
Yeah.
it was good.
Okay. I think you guys have a good evening.
Thank you.
Drive slow. You got a long ride.